Hi, good evening all. Angus Campbell here. It's Monday the 28th of April and time to do a bit more work on the A70L Lightning behind me. So just to recap, last time we were working on this before the weekend. We were focusing upon the front end, so headlights, indicators and the rubber cups for the speedometer and tachometer. And what we said we'd do for the next step would be start thinking about the rear mudguard fittings, because the pattern mudguard that I purchased to replace the original isn't, shall we say, a fit as it could be. So we'll carry on with those considerations next. You'll see I've just mounted up, or offered up the seat. It hasn't got rubbers on the base as yet, but really it was just to see how the bike looked with that on it, and it does seem to suit it well. It's a later style seat from 72, fairly flat, but has got this square pattern to the top surface of the seat on the cover, which actually does mimic to a certain extent the original seat. If we go over to the original seat that came with the bike, I think I said in an early video that this is just beyond repair, to be honest. There's a tank there too, so let's just have a quick look at these. If you look at the seat base of the original seat, it's actually full of holes. It's absolutely rotten, and it's in a terrible condition. And by the time you've patched that up and messed about with it, it's just not going to be worth it. There's just an awful lot of work to do there. And if you turn it over, there's the original seat cover. It's not in too bad a nick, but you can see the original square pattern. So that's why I feel justified in having the square pattern on the new seat, which profile-wise is the new seat is probably a little sort of flatter, but it's not too bad. But just one thing to take note of is just make a note of the pattern at the front of the seat. And if we go back to the new pattern seat, it's not the same, but it's acceptable. Nothing much I can do about that now, but that's okay. I don't mind that. And then just to finish off the tank here, this is the tank that came with the bike. It's in one piece, but that's about all you can say about it, really. You can see inside there it's in a hell of a mess. It's very badly rusted and pitted. There are one or two areas on it that look as though they might perforate as well. In fact, there's a hole there. So the thing is that, yeah, you could, spend an awful lot of time patching this up, but you've no idea really how thin the metal is elsewhere in that tank unless you cut a hole out of the base and have a good scan of it. So unfortunately, that was the reason why I decided not to use that one. And actually, before the weekend, as you know, I went to Stafford Show this last weekend, as per my last video. And I thought about taking these two items to see if anybody wanted them, could make use of them, maybe to use as patterns or whatever, because it seems such a shame to scrap them. But because their original came with a bike, I've kept hold of them. And I'll probably do that while I've got the bike, to be honest. They're a good reference point, if nothing else. So I'll find a home for them again back on the shelves where they've been for a little while, and we'll keep them. But it just goes to show that you buy what are supposed to be, faithfully reproduced patterns, and they're not. Anyway, back to tonight. So what we want to concentrate on is actually under the seat. So we'll just carefully lift that off with one hand because it is quite heavy. Oh, wheels behind there. So what I've done so far is I've got the mudguard on and it's secured here by one bolt and a spacer and by two at the back. There's a hole there which secures the tool tray to the mudguard. It's not an actual stay for the mudguard. And then down the bottom there's a bracket that I've now purchased that will attach to this guard that mounts up to those two lugs at the bottom. And if you remember the last video, I showed the original rear mudguard, which is in very good condition materially, but it's just in an awful colour. There's no chrome on it, and it should be chromed. It has that bracket pop riveted on permanently as standard originally, and I think it was later models of probably T140 Triumphs, T120 and T140 Triumphs that went to the separate bracket on the mudguard, and I think that's what they've reproduced. Anyway, what we've got, if we look over here, is a separate bracket. It came in black, so I painted that up. I use Ford Dove Grey, which is a pretty good, pretty close match, good enough for the original BSA Dove Grey. And here we've got the other components that sit underneath the seat to fill in the gap between the seat and the mudguard. So you've got the battery carrier, you've got the electrical carrier there, and you've got the simple V-shaped tool tray for a tool roll that sit next to it as well. So we'll build those up. Before we start, just one final thing to say, moving across the garage again, so apologies for all this moving about, is since the last video I have done one or two bits and pieces, and that pertains to mounting up the front reflectors and the rubber grommets, and that tidies things up no end. Now everybody's going to say those reflectors are in the wrong place. Well, they're actually not for 72. 71 models with the smaller American tank had the reflectors mounted here, but 72 had a bracket and they were pulled forward. And you probably think, well, that looks as though it's going to actually foul the steering, but I've done some tests on it, and it doesn't actually. So the steering should actually hit the stops before it hits the tank and the reflector and its mount. So we'll get the camera set up and we'll crack on with beginning to look at filling that gap there. Right, everyone, quick update then as to how we're getting on with this rear mudguard, because it doesn't fit well, but the way that I'm managing to do it is to fit everything very, very, very loosely. So what I've done is I've got the bracket in below, all the bolts are in, but they're not tightened up, so we've got lots of play. If you then just offer the mudguard up, just with it hinged at the bottom here, what we found was that it was a million miles away from here, and also these two holes were way back here. So what I've done is I've got a very long bolt here, managed to thread it through the frame hole and the mudguard hole, which was probably about 1.5 inches away from that, and slowly tightened it up and drawn the mudguard up to here. The bracket nuts and bolts are still in place and can be tightened up at any point, which will pull the mudguard then towards the frame and away from the swinging arm. And at the same time, the rear holes have just about lined up. So the mudguard's slightly off centre at the moment, but I can put a locating tool down there and you can just see the hole peeping through there, and I'm sure with a locating rod we can actually just pull that across and get one of the bolts in and then we're away. And similarly, you can see that we can see, you know, part of the hole there, which is a huge improvement. So I think this is going to work. So give me another 5 minutes and I'll come back. So I'm back within a minute, and that's because I've just put a couple of hands on the mudguard and pulled it across slightly as it was slightly out of line. And you can see there we're just about lined up, so this is going to work. A bit more locating and we should be on. So I'll be back shortly with hopefully these bolts in and tightened up. They're only quarter UNF by ½ inch. Once those in and tightened up, I should be able to remove then this long bolt and put the proper bolt in there, which actually should have a spacer between the frame and the mudguard. It's about a ½ inch spacer. So I'll bring you back again shortly. Okay everyone, 10 minutes later, 2 rear bracket bolts in and tightened up, front bracket bolts all tightened up. I've just undone this bolt. Mudguard has pulled away slightly because there should be a spacer there, but the good news is straight in and out, so it's lined up. So I'll just get the correct size, correct length UNF bolt for that now with the spacer that goes in there, tighten that up, and that's that job done. And I'm pretty pleased with that because I didn't think that mudguard was going to fit in a million years, but in the end we sort of pulled it in, and it's almost a stressed member now, so we'll have to keep an eye on it to ensure that it doesn't crack, but it shouldn't do with all the fixing points. But anyway, it's on. Next stop, as I say, get that centre bolt in, and then we'll move on to some of the parts that go in the centre here. Probably not going to get as much done now as we'd hoped, but anyway, made some progress. Okay, battery carrier just about in. So the way the battery carrier is mounted is that it has rubber inserts into each of these loops, and these press onto a pillar bolt, which goes all the way through there. And on this side, these will thread into the electrical carrier, and at the front, the pillar bolt just mounts up onto a lug onto the frame. So that's secure at the front. So what we'll do now is we'll mount up the electrical tray onto the back of this. On the back of the electrical tray is the tool tray, and the tool tray hole, mounting hole, should line up with that hole on the mudguard. So here goes. Okay, after a bit of toing and froing and gentle persuasion, all done. In the end, the final fixing bolt through the rear mudguard goes also through the back of the electrical tray. It's this one here, and into this captive nut, which is on the tool tray. So that goes all the way through from the back of the mudguard and through a bracket on this. So it's all very secure. Now everything tightened up and fits quite well. Wasn't too much of a problem. This pillar bolt here was a bit of a problem lining up because it's slightly out of line here, but managed it in the end. And regarding the fact that I kept the side panels and the side panels and the air boxes on, that's because they didn't get in the way at all, really, because you can get at the pillar bolts through the frame, underneath the frame, sorry, with a screwdriver. And also, what it will allow me to do now is line up the side panels, because they are adjustable so that they're flush with the edge of the electrical tray. In fact, they just come above it, and it's almost like a further sort of support area as well for the side panel. So a bit of adjusting there to do, but then I've got these all to bolt up yet, and also I've got to take the airbox covers off because there's Oh, you can't see it very well from here, sorry. But where the two halves of the airboxes join, inside there's a couple of small screws and with nuts to hold those together. I've got to put those in, and they're easy enough to get to, but you just take the airbox covers off on the outside, so we'll do that job at some point. But anyway, all done, looking good. And obviously as well, when we're lining up the side panels, we'll take them off first actually, so we can just get the coils in and get the electrical components on and be able to get underneath just to bolt them up. I was thinking about mounting the electrical components themselves up before I put the tray in, but decided against it because I thought there might be a bit of heave-hoeing to do here and there, which there was, and I didn't want to damage any of the components. But they'll be easy enough to mount up with the side panels off. Okay, that's it for this video, everyone. Thanks very much for watching. The next job then definitely will be the wheels. I've been threatening to do them for some time, and that is with respect to cleaning up the internals to mount up onto the brake plates, but also to put the spindles in the wheels as well. So we'll be lining those up next once we've just fitted the electrical components onto the tray, and I've got the original coils in here at the moment just to clean them up with a bit of degreaser and see how they come up, and also we'll test them as well, because if they still work, then we'll use them, and usually the exteriors clean up and polish up pretty well, even though there might be a little scratch. We can usually bring those up pretty well, so that'll be the next job too. Okay, rambling on a bit now, so thanks very much everybody for watching, and see you again soon. Cheers.